Hello, I'm Brad DeRoche. In today's lesson, number 14, out of our series of 30 lessons on guitar fundamentals, we're going to discuss modern fingering concepts. Now, this modern fingering concept maybe isn't so modern, but for me, it represents a new way of looking at right-hand fingering for scales and other melodic patterns in our repertoire. This idea was brought to me partially from some older ideas, from Segovia scales, and other teachers had shown me different things, and then also Matt Palmer's AMI fingering concept that he showed me 10 or 12 years ago. So a lot of modern players are using ring middle index AMI fingering for scales, and they're pairing that with 3-note groupings in the left hand. But what I've come up with is, I would argue, a little bit more universal and can be used not only in scales but any other melodic fragments in our pieces of music. So here we are. It's a fairly complicated topic, and I'll try to make it as simple as I can. To start with, this fingering concept that I'm going to give you, I think, solves a lot of problems when we're learning new repertoire and we're trying to figure out the best fingering for it. In the past, what I typically would have done for any kind of scale passage in a piece of music is I would have used index and middle in alternation, as I showed you in the last lesson. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's my go-to for most things. So index and middle, when I've got a little scale passage, I'm going to use index and middle in some combination, either starting with I or starting with M, and then alternating, etc. You get the idea. So what I came up with, though, after meeting Matt Palmer and having him explain how he approached the right hand, I'm borrowing his ideas pretty heavily from him, but I'm also mixing in some of my older ideas from learning Segovia scales and other things that I had done in my past. So here's how it works. What we're trying to match is basically the number of notes in a group on one string with a specific right hand fingering. Okay, so the number of notes in a group on one string with a specific right hand fingering pattern. So here's the idea. If I were to play a single note on any string, I can choose any finger in the right hand to pluck that note. Okay, so one is easy. Any finger will do. Now, let's move forward. 2-note groupings. When we do 2-note groupings, there's a specific fingering I want you to use for it. It's middle index, M-I. Why that? It's based on the idea of how the hand closes. When we close our hand, similar to an arpeggio style, it closes from the little finger side toward the thumb side, all right, like so. And so what we're trying to do is to match this movement with a fingering that falls into that very natural way of playing or moving our hand. So if we're going to do 2 notes, we're just going to take the last 2 fingers, M-I, and use that for a 2-note grouping. So for instance, if I had these 2 notes, I would use M-I in the right hand to pluck those. And it doesn't matter if the notes are ascending or descending. It's still M-I. So 2-note groupings, M-I, M-I. Now if I have 3 notes in a group, I'm going to use the same idea here based on how the hand folds or closes. A-M-I. All right, 3 notes, A-M-I. So if I had 3 notes on a string, like so, then my right hand fingering becomes A-M-I. All right, so 3-note grouping, A-M-I. Doesn't matter if they're ascending or descending or combination. All right, so that's going up and down, ascending and descending. Okay, so recapping, 1 note, any finger will do. 2 notes, M-I. 3 notes, A-M-I, A-M-I. What about 4 notes? Well, most people don't use the little finger to pluck. It just isn't very practical. It's not very coordinated compared to the others. It's shorter, etc. So that's not really going to be an option. Instead, what we have to do is to find some combination of these fingers that comes up to 4 notes, or we could also include the thumb. So here's a couple of different options for 4-note groupings. First off, we could use the thumb and have A-M-I-P, A-M-I-P. So if I had a 4-note group, I'll move to the first string here. If I did 1, 2, 3, 4 notes here, I'm just going up and back down. So in the right hand, it becomes A-M-I-P. Now sometimes it's hard to get the sound quality the same with the thumb as it is the finger, so that's pretty tricky. You have to work a lot on that. Another way to play 4-note groupings is actually starting with the thumb and then going to A-M-I. So it could be thumb, or letter P, A-M-I. All right, a little trickier to work out. But then there's one more that I like to use a lot, and more than the other ones with the thumb, and that's to go A-M-I, as we've done before, and then return to the middle finger for the 4th one. So A-M-I-M. All right? Not quite as fast as closing and using the thumb, but it keeps a more consistent sound and fingering pattern. So it's pretty valuable for me to come up with that one. So A-M-I-M. Now, anything beyond 2, 3, and 4-note groupings becomes a compound of 2, 3, and 4. So 5-note groupings, for instance, becomes either 2 plus 3 or 3 plus 2, or M-I, A-M-I, or A-M-I, M-I. Let me show you. So 5 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I just play that little scale fragment there, I could have A-M-I, M-I, that's 5 notes, or I could start with middle, M-I, A-M-I. Again, first one, A-M-I, M-I, or second one, M-I, A-M-I. They both work great, and you'll find that sometimes you have a preference for one or the other, but they're both good, and you should actually practice both. All right, you get the idea with those. So now 6 notes would be A-M-I, A-M-I, or M-I, M-I, M-I. Any combination of the previous 2, 3, or 4 note chunks will work. All right, so recapping this idea, what we're looking for is the number of notes on a string in a group, and we're going to pair that with a specific right-hand fingering. And this right-hand fingering doesn't really need to change. It works for most every situation. So if it's a single note, any finger will do. It could be thumb, it could be index, middle ring, doesn't matter. If it's 2 notes, I'm going to use M-I. 3 notes, A-M-I. 4 notes can be A-M-I-P, P-A-M-I, or A-M-I-M. 5 notes and more is a combination of these fingerings. So either M-I, A-M-I, or A-M-I, M-I, etc. 6 notes and beyond. You can just combine all these different ones and come up with your own. Now, how to practice this? This is a really simple way to practice every one of these 2, 3, 4, and 5 note groupings. It's using that 1 octave major scale pattern that I showed you in a previous lesson, which goes like this. Hopefully you remember it from before. I'm going to start in 5th position. I'm playing a C major scale, 1 octave. So the fingering is on the 3rd string, fingers 1 and 3, frets are 5 and 7. Then on the 2nd string, the fingers are 1, 2, and 4, frets are 5, 6, and 8. And on the 1st string, fingers are 1, 3, and 4, frets are 5, 7, and 8. So it makes a C major scale pattern. So now when we practice that, when we start out, we have 2 notes here, so that would be M-I over here. A 3-note grouping here, so A-M-I. 1st string, I'm going to turn this into a 5-note grouping because I'm going to ascend and descend. Here I did A-M-I, M-I. Or you could do M-I, A-M-I. You need both, so practice both. Coming back down on the 2nd string, 3 notes, A-M-I. And then on the 3rd string, to make it a 4-note group, I do M-I, M-I, excuse me, that's wrong. I do 3, 1, 3, 1, making it 4 notes, but then I practice either A-M-I-M or A-M-I-P. So when I put it all together, M-I, A-M-I, A-M-I, M-I, So that gives me a 2-note, a 3-note, a 5-note, and a 4-note grouping in that order. But anything 2 through 5 is practiced that way. All right, so you get all of the right hand fingerings in that one little 1-octave scale pattern. It's a really great way to practice. And then you can apply this to basically every piece of music that you work on. And so you don't have to sit and try to figure out, okay, which one of my string crossings is going to be good or bad or whatever. You've already got a right hand fingering that will fit as long as you know the number of notes you're going to play in a group on that string. So if it's 3 notes, AMI is your answer. All right. Is this 100% foolproof? Unfortunately, no, it's not. It's like most other things. There's just no absolutes. I find that even though the concept makes sense in my mind and I use it for a lot of things, there are some times when it just doesn't feel right in my hand and I switch back to MI or something else. So I don't believe that there's any one way of doing scales or melodic patterns on the instrument. I just think that this modern fingering concept is very useful. I wish I would have come up with this many years ago. I think it would have solved a lot of fingering issues I've had in pieces in the past, because it gives me at least a starting point, one way to play a passage, any melodic passage with multiple notes per string on the guitar. So it's used for scales. It's not an arpeggio pattern. We're going to look at those later on, going across strings. But for right now, it's just a way to handle scale playing and melodic fragments within each piece that you work on. And so again, a quick recap of this modern fingering. If it's a single note, you can use any finger, thumb, index, middle, or ring, doesn't matter. 2 notes, MI. 3 notes, AMI. 4 notes, AMI, M, or some of the other ones. 5 notes, AMI, MI. 6 notes would just be AMI, etc. You get the idea. So hopefully this helps you and gives you some food for thought and maybe a better way to approach fingering new pieces and also practicing scales. All right, so I'll see you in the next lesson. We'll talk about some of the more extended scale patterns and how to move up and down the fingerboard with scales. All right, till then, practice well. I'll see you soon.